This weekend, I have been asked to speak about the six perfections. And in general, the six perfections constitute the actual substance, the actual means of the Bodhisattva path. The path that begins with the generation of Bodhichitta and through its various successive stages consists of the gradual perfection of innate qualities, elimination of defects, and finally, through these unmistaken means, the six perfections themselves, culminates in the achievement of perfect Buddhahood. Therefore, since these six perfections are the actual means through which or by which all Buddhas of the past have achieved Buddhahood, all Buddhas of the present have achieved it, and all Buddhas of the future will achieve it, we call the path of the six perfections the great highway of all Buddhas. However, in order to begin this path, in order to implement these six perfections, we need to understand that the root of all of them is the generation of Bodhicitta. Without the generation of Bodhicitta, it is impossible to actually practice the true six perfections. And attempting to follow the Bodhisattva path without Bodhicitta cannot possibly work. All of us here have declared ourselves to be followers of the Mahayana. We are yogins and yoginis of the Vajrayana. So it is somewhat assumed that we have generated bodhicitta. But we need really to ask ourselves the question, have I really generated bodhicitta? If you've taken the bodhisattva vow and take it seriously and keep it and work on it, then through that and the practice of the six perfections, your future Buddhahood will definitely occur. But if we have not generated bodhicitta, or if we're uncertain about the seriousness of our generation of it, then any attempt we might make to practice the six perfections in the absence of bodhicitta would be limited to, at best, slight amounts of defiled virtue and will not lead to Buddhahood. So first of all, we need to examine our own bodhicitta. We need to begin by examining our own mind. And we need to ask ourselves the question, well, I know or I've heard that samsara is an ocean of suffering. Do I really have the desire to be free? Most of those who know or who have heard that samsara is an ocean of suffering still feel hopeless. They feel that authentic freedom or liberation from samsara is not really possible for them, and therefore they allow themselves to remain attached to samsara and samsaric things because they think they really have no better option. So the first thing we must ask ourselves, before we even question whether or not we have bodhicitta, is whether or not we have the sincere desire to achieve freedom from samsara. Now, while the desire for freedom from samsara is not itself bodhicitta, and is furthermore not sufficient as a Mahayana intention, it is an absolutely necessary element in both. To turn to the Mahayana intention specifically, like us, all other beings are immersed in this ocean of three types of suffering. The pervasive suffering of the transitory composite, the suffering which is actual pain, and the suffering of change. And whatever temporary pleasure or relief we may experience or observe others to experience, we need to understand that it is simply a very temporary, fragile state where there is slightly less suffering for that person. It is not a permanent state of freedom from suffering, and in fact is not even a temporary state of freedom from suffering. It is a brief lessening in the amount of suffering. If we understand this, then we will have an empathetic and sincere desire to bring about the freedom not only of ourselves from samsara, but of all other beings as well. So briefly put, the very root and starting point of the six perfections is impartial love and compassion. If we observe those other beings whom we can see, other humans and animals and so forth, we will see that fundamentally they are all suffering terribly. And in no case has any of us intentionally sought out suffering. We don't suffer because we want to suffer. We suffer because we are ignorant of what constitute authentic causes of happiness, virtuous actions and so forth, and true causes of suffering, unvirtuous actions and so forth. Beings suffer because they mistake causes of suffering to be causes of happiness and thereby bring about their own prolonged and unwanted suffering. In spite of this mistake, our true nature, the nature of each and every one of us, is perfect. It is what we call Buddha nature. And it is on the basis of this nature, it is because they possess the same nature we do, that all Buddhas of the past, present, and future achieve awakening. There is no being anywhere of any type that lacks Buddha nature. But while we all have it, we fail to recognize it. We fail to recognize what it is, its qualities, its excellence. And in the delusion that ensues upon that absence of recognition, we give rise to attachment, aversion, and bewilderment. And these constitute the mechanism or momentum which keeps us in samsara. Now, this is equally true of all of us, of all of the countless sentient beings who are immersed in the ocean of suffering that we call samsara. The only thing that makes us different from the majority of sentient beings is that because of the ripening at one time of countless amounts of good karma we've accumulated in previous lives, we have been born with precious human bodies. We have the opportunity to hear the Buddha Dharma, to encounter teachers, and to practice the Buddha's teachings. Because we have this opportunity, we have the opportunity to bring about the liberation of ourselves and others. But at the same time, we are still immersed in this ocean of samsaric suffering, as are all other beings, chiefly through the force of our fixation on a self, and all of the kleshas or mental afflictions that develop from that. If we want to make use of this tremendous opportunity we have, this precious human existence, access to the teachings and practice of the Buddha Dharma, we must begin with the cultivation of impartial love and compassion. When someone achieves an equal degree of compassion for all beings, it is certain that their ensuing practice of Dharma will be both authentic and effective. So therefore, we need to start by increasing our compassion. A few minutes ago, I said that it's essential to generate impartial love and compassion for all beings. And that sounds all very well, but it doesn't explain anything to you about what that involves or how to actually do it. So to explain a little bit about this, we observe other beings around us. We observe many other human beings, and we also observe, or can observe, many different species of animals. What are they all doing? And why are they all doing what they're doing? If we examine the behavior of ourselves and others, if we examine the behavior of each and every human being and each and every other sentient being subject to our observation, we will come to the conclusion that whatever beings do, we do it for one fundamental reason: the pursuit of happiness. We all, in different ways, are seeking the same thing. We are seeking to be happy, and we are seeking, as a corollary of happiness, the end or the avoidance of suffering. The proof of this is that all sentient beings are busy. All of the people we observe, all of the animals, insects, fish, birds that we observe are all extremely busy. The only reason for our being so busy is that whatever we are busy at, we believe, rightly or wrongly, and I'll return to that what we are doing will bring us happiness and will end or lessen our suffering. The problem with our busyness is that we are ignorant. Most beings are utterly ignorant of what constitute causes of happiness and causes of suffering. Most of what most beings do in order to achieve happiness merely causes their own greater suffering. And most of what beings avoid doing because they think it will bring suffering is the things that would actually bring them happiness. So the problem is that while each and every one of us equally and fundamentally, deeply, seeks happiness and the end of suffering, we almost always bring about the opposite of what we intend. We almost always experienced profound and prolonged states of suffering that we never intended to experience. Furthermore, while all this is going on, because it is caused by delusion, by ignorance, we respond to it, we react to it poisonously. We react to our suffering with hatred, pride, jealousy, greed, attachment, and even more bewilderment and delusion. So we cause our own suffering because we don't know what we're doing. And in the midst of suffering, we generate a further delusion, further mental affliction that causes yet further suffering and yet progressively worse and worse the choices. Now here I'm principally speaking about the realms that we can observe, This is true, of course, of those realms we cannot observe, such as the Preta realm, the Hell realm, and so on. Except that in those realms, the immediate situation is far worse. In fact, worse than we can even imagine. But the principle is the same. The principle is very simply that each and every being wants to be happy just as much as you or I want to be happy. Each and every being wants not to suffer just as much as you and I want not to suffer. So the starting point of love and compassion is to extend yourself beyond your limited concern for yourself by being empathetic, by being able to identify with others, by extrapolating from your own experience, your own feelings, using your own body, feelings, and mind as a way to understand the bodies, feelings, and minds of others, by using yourself as an example to understand others. Just as much as we can begin this analysis or examination by thinking, why are beings doing what they do, we can ask the same question of ourselves. What am I doing, and why am I doing it? What do we do? Everything we do is included in the pursuit of happiness and the attempt to avoid or eradicate suffering. Generally speaking, most beings limit this to the achievement of immediate gratification and freedom from gross suffering in this life. And if we are successful in doing this to the extent that we had hoped, then we call ourselves successful. But because the ways that we seek our own happiness and our own freedom from pain and suffering are more often than not profoundly unskillful, they actually almost invariably end up leading to the opposite of what we seek. Because at the same time we further react to our frustration and suffering with poisonous mental afflictions, we ensure ourselves by attempting to seek our own happiness alone, in this life alone, we ensure ourselves many, many successive lives of unimaginable misery in the future. This is especially true for us as human beings. To be born a human being is a wonderful thing, but it is also the most dangerous state in samsara. It is wonderful to be human because human beings have the particular type of body and mind that enable us to do things like study and to practice and understand Dharma and eventually achieve Buddhahood, or at least set foot on the path. But being human is also extremely dangerous because human beings can do more harm to others, can engage in degrees of wrongdoing far beyond what any other species can do. Traditionally, in most societies, we're afraid of ghosts and spirits and demons and so on, but there's never been any ghost or spirit or demon that could do the damage or harm that a single human being bent on such harm can do. As human beings, we have the power to inflict immeasurable, incalculable damage on others. What we call hell is nothing other than the ripening of such great wrongdoing. So the starting point of our path must be the observation and careful choice of karma, of actions, engaging in virtue ourselves, avoiding wrongdoing as much as we can, and also the benevolent aspiration that each and every other being do the same thing. The good mental state of sincerely wishing that beings accomplish the state of happiness they seek through engaging in virtuous actions, that they avoid the suffering they seek to avoid through avoiding those unvirtuous actions that are causes of suffering. If we begin to develop love and compassion in that simple way, it will eventually grow until we become bodhisattvas who can actually exchange ourselves for others, and until we become those who can perfectly practice the six perfections. But it has to begin with our taking responsibility for what we do and with our benevolent aspiration that all other beings do so as well. Because those two things are the key point to the development of even elementary love and compassion. Especially concern for others, putting others' needs above our own, is essential. As Shantideva wrote in the Bodhicharyavatara, it is through altruism that Buddhas achieve Buddhahood, and it is through selfishness that sentient beings remain in samsara. A similar quotation from a different source, when the Mahasiddha Drukpa Kunle was visiting the great image of the Buddha in Lhasa, instead of prostrating to it, he first pointed his finger at the image and said, "In the beginning, you and I were exactly the same, but then you were diligent and achieved Buddhahood, and I was lazy and I'm still in samsara. For that reason and that reason alone, I will now prostrate to you." The circumstances that all of us here enjoy at this time, which, as I mentioned, have arisen or come together to the ripening at one time of countless amounts of merit from previous lives, where we find ourselves with a ready access to authentic teachers of Dharma, ready access to the means and venue of its practice, and the company of others who wish to traverse the same path as ourselves. If you think about it statistically, it seems impossible that any being in samsara could ever acquire such an opportunity. It seems impossible, and in fact it would be impossible were it not for the merit that we've accumulated and the aspirations that we've made. But we still need to address the issue of our constant procrastination. We all have this thought, I really must practice Dharma. It's important to practice Dharma. But we also have the idea that we can do it later. The problem with this idea is that time does not stand still. And as each unit of time passes, our lives are that much shorter. We have been in this room now for about 1 hour. Each of our lives is 1 hour shorter than it was when we entered this room. The time between now and death is 1 hour less for each of us. To put it bluntly, we are each 1 hour closer to our death than we were. Now, some of you are still young enough that you may think, yeah, but there's plenty of time. This thought, yeah, but there's plenty of time, is actually the worst demon that could possess us. It is the most severe obstacle to our achievement of awakening. Because we have no way of knowing how much time is left. We know that the clock is ticking, but we don't know how long we have. If you watch or read the news, you will see so many accounts of people dying as babies, as children, and as young adults. The one thing you will never see in any news report is that someone lived forever. That has never happened and never will. And especially, regardless of your exact age, think about how many years you have been alive up to this point. And think about what you have done during those years. What have you spent most of the time during the years you've been alive up to this point doing? You may say, well, I've done some Dharma practice, and that may be true, but how much? And how much of it was authentically motivated by bodhicitta? In some cases, no doubt, your Dharma practice is tremendous. But to be honest, in the case of most of us, it consists of a weak enthusiasm for Dharma. The idea that Dharma is something that's good, basically, although I'm not sure if it's really true or not, but it's sort of good. I mean, among things that are good or bad, it's a good thing, but I'm not really sure if it's true or not, so I don't really want to invest that much into it because I'm not sure. If we're honest, that is where most people are. If that's where you are, if you have never practiced Dharma with unconditional commitment and unconditional altruism, I'm afraid that your life up to this moment has been wasted. We really have to ask ourselves, what have I done with my life? How much of the years that I've been alive have I spent doing good? And how much have I spent doing wrong? If you calculate the amount of time you've been alive from your birth until tonight, I imagine that in most cases, you will find that the amount of time you have spent practicing Dharma would be less than 1% of the time you have been alive. And most of that other 99+% has been spent in distraction, in what we call entertainment. Distraction and entertainment are not necessarily overt wrongdoing, but they do perpetuate that very state of delusion that will leave us utterly defenseless, without any hope, without any resources, or any help at the moment of our deaths. Now, I know I was supposed to talk about the 6 perfections starting tonight, but I felt that it was my responsibility to provide you with a very realistic context for this, because we cannot begin to discuss or practice the 6 perfections until we understand that they must be founded on bodhicitta, and before that, on the sincere desire to be free from samsara. And I'm going to stop there for this evening.